This July 4th, celebrate the spirit of freedom and comfort with Minky Couture blankets. Wrap yourself in the softness of luxury Minky fabric as you cozy up under the stars and stripes. Our blankets are designed to ignite your patriotic pride and keep you warm all night long. From backyard barbecues to fireworks in the sky, make every moment memorable with Minky Couture. Indulge in the ultimate comfort and style this Independence Day. Visit us at MinkyCouture.com or your nearest store today and embrace the true essence of July 4th with Minky Couture blankets. Freedom has never felt so cozy.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to a new Sox Machine podcast episode. I'm Josh Nelson, and yes, I'm back from my vacation visiting Seattle, Alaska, and British Columbia. If my voice sounds a bit off, well, COVID is still a thing, and I just recently tested positive, so I'll do my best to maintain through this episode. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to get caught up with what I missed while away, but the servants at the Palace at 35th and Shields continue to talk. We know now why Rick Hahn has been carrying the tune that he has recently, as we know that his contract expires after the 2024 season. And now the latest report from Crain's Business Journal's Greg Hintz, one of the most well-connected reporters in Illinois politics, that the Chicago White Sox are starting their leverage play on a new stadium and threatening again to possibly relocate. We are recording this episode while the White Sox are playing the red-hot Seattle Mariners on Monday night, and for reference, the White Sox are already down 5-1 in the second inning, so we're not missing much, Jim, as Jim Margulis, the managing editor of SoxMachine.com, the co-host, joins me. So, Jim, I didn't get to see like 8 games the White Sox have played, the games against the Brewers, the games against the Cubs, the games against the Rockies. And from what I've seen from the first 2 innings against the Seattle Mariners, looks like I haven't missed much, but what did I miss while I was away?
Yeah, that's a big part of it is really ugly first innings. The White Sox either grabbing a small lead or, not starting off well and the pitching immediately crapping the bed that happened against the Rockies at Coors Field and, at altitude and such. Like you can say, it's maybe used as an excuse, say the environment, even though the Rockies have been, struggling all year. But yeah, then to come home closer to sea level and do that against the Mariners, who are, as you mentioned, red hot, but like, everybody's doing damage, not just Julio Rodriguez. So basically they've caught you up real good. I would say the only thing you really missed in terms of like signature moments, aside from a nice 8th inning on Sunday against the Rockies, like having Lenyn Sosa have a couple big moments is nice. But like otherwise, I think the defining moment of the season, or a defining moment, was the second Cubs White Sox game at Wrigley Field with the Gregory Santos blow in the save. Pedro Grifol calling it the worst loss of the year, even though the White Sox are well out of it and have nothing to play for. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically where we're at. And also Grifol keeps... remember when he said that he did not want to compromise a major league win for development?
Right.
And now he's kind of teetering back and forth between like understanding why that was dumb for him to say and saying guys should be playing every day like Sosa and Colas and Perez, and then like not doing that. So he doesn't know what he wants to do or how he wants to do it. So that's great.
That's exactly what you want to hear in a guy in his first year managing the ball club. 100 plus games into his tenureship, still not knowing what he wants to do with this ball club, but we know he's got 2 more years left on his deal, Jim. At the very least.
Yeah. It's bad. There's some Palace intrigue going on when the White Sox let it know one way or another how long people are employed for in the front office.
Yeah, the White Sox don't do that. Unlike their counterparts with the Chicago Cubs. The Chicago Cubs usually have a big press release. Like I remember when they re-signed Theo Epstein to that 5-year contract, they provided specifics on how much money Theo could make. Like, here's his base salary. We hit some incentives, winning the division, winning the pennant, winning the World Series. This is how much money that Theo Epstein can make while working for the Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox completely mum. Like, we have no idea what the contract status is for Kenny Williams, but we do know now about Rick Hahn and Pedro Grifol, which we'll talk about them in a moment, because to Jim's point, the Palace intrigue, Rick Hahn's job status was the number one topic we were going to talk about until about 6 p.m. Central Time, when the Crain's Business Journal in Chicago, which is a pretty critical publication in the city, especially when it comes to business matters. Like, if you want to be in tune with what's going on the business front of the city of Chicago, Crain's is an excellent resource. And front page on their website, the number one story from Greg Hins, which I mentioned in the intro, well connected in Illinois politics. The Chicago White Sox are contemplating relocating, and I think that's the headline that grabs attention, Jim. When you read through this story, I think there's two important parts, White Sox fans. One, from the report, quote, no decision has been made or appears imminent, but among the possibilities are moving to a new stadium in the city or suburbs, or even relocating to Nashville, a subject of recurring gossip on and off for years. There also is some chatter among team insiders that at age 87, Reinsdorf may seek to sell the White Sox while keeping ownership of the Chicago Bulls. Reinsdorf's longtime business partner at the United Center, former Chicago Blackhawks owner Rocky Wirtz, recently died. The prospect of a White Sox move is serious enough that at least one Chicago developer, who asked not to be named, is preparing a bid. And the situation has caught the attention of City Hall, where new Mayor Brandon Johnson's administration is, quote, planning to hold a conversation with the team about its future, end quote, according to a senior advisor, Jason Lee. Jim, I know you have mentioned many times in our 10 years podcasting about this damn franchise, you don't like this particular topic. Mm-hmm. But unlike other podcasts that cover the White Sox, I think at Sox Machine, we are uniquely qualified to discuss this report from Crain's because, one, I live in Bridgeport, and as a resident keeping an ear on the ground, I have a good feel of what's happening in this ward, in the neighborhood that the White Sox reside. Two, you live in Nashville, so you get to hear all of the rumors of Major League Baseball coming to that city, because it's just not the White Sox. I know you texted me Baltimore and Milwaukee is also flirting with Nashville to try to create their own leverage, and you can provide perspective that Chicagoans don't get to hear about what is being talked about in Nashville. Let's start with the timing of this report. And again, it's somewhat curious after Bob Nightingale's report on Sunday, Jim, in the USA Today, where he wrote in his column that the White Sox are having internal reviews. Maybe this is part of their internal reviews, and it is the larger part and probably more important. Actually, it is more important than Rick Hahn's job status with the Chicago White Sox and what the White Sox are going to do as far as their location and the future in the neighborhood of Bridgeport and their stadium situation. What do you make of the timing that this is now coming out a night after Bob Nightingale's Sunday morning report?
Well, I guess to speak to like the second part first about Nightingale's Sunday report, like Bruce Levine and then others tweeted that like the White Sox did respond to it in a way saying that they always conduct these kind of internal interviews, just after unsuccessful seasons. And we've had many unsuccessful seasons. That was my tone I interpreted from it. Like, just like it reminded me of Pedro Grifol, like saying earlier in the season that he's been around teams that don't have it. And, the White Sox are not it. And like, yeah, you've been around the Royals who seldom have it. Like, you might want to keep that quiet, but it does make me wonder, seeing this story come up, that I wonder if there is a little bit of just 5-year planning it, just trying to understand what might be happening with the sales, like what might be a good time to sell. Like, if Reinsdorf assesses the landscape of, public funding for stadiums or like, interesting places to put stadiums that might get a certain amount of funding that he wouldn't have to pay for. Would it make sense for him to sell after that because the franchise value will have a certain amount more? Or will it make sense to be like, let's get out now and have the next owner of the White Sox deal with the stadium, or perhaps have the appetite to build a ballpark that turns into like a ballpark village that, Atlanta has or St. Louis has. So, I don't know if they're connected in terms of like Rick Hahn's job status being tied to the sale of the White Sox, but I can see a situation of just like having a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, because like Reinsdorf might say, to the ownership group and to, some front office members saying like, I'm just kind of getting an idea of what dollars I can get and what dollars I'd have to spend, or how much it would cost to really pull off an effort to get the kind of sweetheart deal or close to the same sweetheart deal I got for my previous stadium. So, heads on a swivel, guys, there might be a change here. And so, maybe it's a little bit of heads up, but I do think having Rick Hahn's job status or his length of his contract out there is slightly different. And so I think disconnected from this greater big picture of where the White Sox are going, or who might be staying with the White Sox and who might be departing and who might be cashing out.
So from the Nashville perspective, what are you hearing living in Nashville about the city reacting to these rumors of a Major League Baseball team possibly relocating to the city? Because I know for many years now, Nashville has had private investors build up a team to persuade Major League Baseball to give them a new franchise once the league expands to 32 teams. Have you heard, or what have you heard, Jim, from a Nashville perspective on the rumors about Major League Baseball coming into the city?
I haven't heard, it seems like from what I've heard in the meetings I've listened to, caught up on through the news, that they still want an expansion team, or like they've always wanted an expansion team. They've maintained that this stance is about an expansion team. It's not like Montreal or like the 2-city plan with the Rays, like a possibly poaching somebody else. Like whenever it comes up, whenever the discussion of the Nashville Stars, which is Dave Stewart and the Negro Leagues Museum, are part of this ownership group or like advocacy committee for potential ownership group, that, it's just new team. They have no interest in like getting somebody else. So to me, like all of this Nashville heat is coming from the teams, and just people want to relocate, because also like if they relocate a team, like they're not selling to Dave Stewart's group,
right?
They're, or in all likelihood, like they're not going to, like John Angelos with the Orioles. Like I guess he has a house in Nashville, or he lives in Nashville. So when the Orioles weren't committing to what seemed like a pretty appealing public funding package for Camden Yards from Baltimore and the state of Maryland, that, them not picking it up right away, and like Angelos getting really greedy about what he wants to do with the land around Camden Yards, which he doesn't own, that, I think made a lot of people worry that, he might pursue his own Nashville desires and move the team there. And same thing with the Brewers, who are angling for money for Miller Park, saying that it's an outdated facility, which is laughable. But like, they're saying that, if they don't get the public funds, they might move to Nashville, and their AAA team is in Nashville. So they already have a connection somewhat, but like, I don't think Atanasio is going to sell to a Nashville group. So like all of those teams or all of those groups would be moving teams down. So like, the effort right now that's with Nashville is all people who want to own a team themselves, basically, or at least have the money to do that. And so it's angled more towards an expansion. Now, if there's a case where like one of these stadium matters does get critical, that maybe they'll change their tune, or maybe they'll change their aims to where like, maybe we don't need ownership, maybe a partial share, or maybe front office jobs, etc. But, poaching another team or getting another team hasn't been the angle, because all this, I guess leading groups have been not civic based necessarily, but from a group of potential owners.
So unlike Tampa in the early 90s, this is flimsy, because with Tampa, there was a stadium built.
Yeah.
Like there was a ready move-in situation. So when teams were threatening to move to Tampa, Chicago, San Francisco, they had to take that seriously, because there was a stadium that these teams could move into. Nashville, there's nothing, right? There's no baseball stadium that anyone can move into.
No, they're exploring possible land right now and possible public funding, but nothing is close to being shovel ready or even like, bought yet for that. So no, they're years away. And so that's why I think expansion is more what they're angling towards, because there is no ready plan to accommodate a major league team in a hurry. Right now, they're hashing out what the Titans are going to get for their stadium, a closed roof stadium, basically where Nissan Stadium is right now. So like that's been a big priority. So it's really hard to think of the state and the city having funding for a baseball stadium right away, or like concurrently with what's happening with the football stadium plan. So that's why it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And like when it came to Tampa, like, Reinsdorf has been, or he was open about it in the 90s after the Sox stayed, that, it was purely leverage. Or, the Giants were doing the same thing with leverage. Like basically that stadium was perfect for those teams' aims, to the point where like Tampa, I guess, that's how Tampa got a team or St. Petersburg got a team, is because like that was a whole lot of money for nothing. And like basically, Major League Baseball was using them for pawns, and like they could have sued the league for basically being promised a team that they didn't get and putting all this money towards it. And basically all they accomplished with their original stadium, the Suncoast Dome, as it was called, was just being a really sweet deal for teams to say like, we can move there right now. And, that's right now what no other team has. So like when Milwaukee's floating it, when Baltimore's floating it, Kansas City hasn't, I don't think Kansas City has been explicit about Nashville, but part of the thing they're doing with their attempts to relocate in a couple different downtown locations from Kauffman Stadium, and Kauffman's a lovely ballpark too. Like there's no reason to move out of there. And a lot of Royals fans aren't understanding the drive to do so, is that just, everybody's centering on Nashville because like, Nashville can probably accommodate a major league team. Certainly, like I think as well as Las Vegas can. And Las Vegas is getting a team now. So like, that does open up smaller markets to become a potential landing spot. But I think they're just right now, it's pure leverage, and not in the same way that Tampa was or the Tampa area was, because there's nothing close to being built here.
So the connection of the White Sox to Nashville, I think, is incredibly flimsy. So if you're a fan reading the Crain's article, listening to this part of the podcast, worried that the White Sox could move to Nashville, I think that is very unlikely, Jim. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, for a whole host of reasons, not just Nashville, but any market, especially one that isn't close to having a stadium built, just because, the league would have to approve it, the commissioner would have to approve it, and Chicago already has a team setup that works well. Everybody agrees to. There are no territorial disputes between the Cubs and White Sox when it comes to like things like the Masson deal that hung up the Orioles and Nationals for years, or the way that the Giants prevented the A's from moving to like San Jose and other areas that might have been more hospitable and maybe had more public funding for the A's to relocate to a better ballpark. Like the Giants were able to block that. So like the Cubs and White Sox are, they already have a 2-team sharing agreement in like one of the largest markets in the country. So to go from there to Nashville or a much smaller market, nobody has really understood what the White Sox could ever do in Chicago, because the Reinsdorf ownership era has been so terrible. Like, that's what kind of drives me nuts about the whole, like, White Sox don't support their team or they're going to move, is like any owner who bought the White Sox. That's why I'm intrigued by it, is like, if we talked about the idea of like a honeymoon period for a new owner, and like if a new owner came in with new ideas, and like the White Sox made the postseason 2 years in a row, and there were real changes with the front office and like the stuff they're investing with in the front office, like research and development, and they start like getting a reputation for being a real pipeline or a real factory of players to go, like the White Sox would be huge. The White Sox would be drawing 2.5-3 million easily. In Nashville, like if you move the White Sox as they currently are in Nashville, like maybe they draw 1.5 million. Like it's not going to be a huge ballpark they're going to build because the metro area isn't that big, but like it's just like it's not going to draw huge amounts, just because, if you have a team that's losing 90 games and really does nothing to inspire faith in the way they're operating, like, it's smaller markets are not going to sustain a team as bad as the White Sox have been and as antagonistic to the fan base of the White Sox have been. So that's why, like, there's nothing wrong with the Chicago market holding two teams. There's everything wrong with the way the Reinsdorf has run the team. And I think, if the White Sox vacated it, and I don't think they will, I don't think the league would approve it. I don't see why the league would say let's just get a better owner in here and make a lot of money.
Yeah. So Jim and I agree that Nashville, highly unlikely the White Sox would move there. I know I texted this to you, Jim, but to tell our podcast listeners that the whole Nashville angle to me is White Sox fans, can you please put a better product on the field and treat us paying customers better? White Sox ownership, what if we just got a new fan base?
Yeah,
we don't like
kinda.
you guys. You guys don't like us. How about we just move the team and we just get a new fan base? Why don't we do that?
That would kind of play into the Music Man theme I've had this whole year of the White Sox just selling an invisible product that actually doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything as advertised. And then now here comes the skipping town part of just on to the next city to find some suckers. But yeah, it does strike me as a little bit conveniently timed in terms of well, you'd miss us if we were gone, no matter how much you'd drive you nuts, and just change the conversation a little bit. I think fan shaming had been a little bit absent from the proceedings. So the White Sox can't shame fans exactly because the product has been so despicable and so unlikable that they'd be laughed out of any forum they tried to stage that on. So now is the kind of, I guess, cousin to fan shaming, which is just fan threatening. It's a curious time to do it just because relocating or kind of dangling the idea of possibly maybe down the road if such and such and such and such and such doesn't happen, relocating right now, as the White Sox are playing, that falls under the field of don't threaten us with a good time. The White Sox fans being freed to root for anybody else, whether they're have always liked other teams more or the way they run more or are even Cubs curious. The Cubs fans seem like they're having a good time. Maybe I can, if the White Sox left, I could maybe not feel as bad for being intrigued by their product. Who knows? But just, to do it now versus when the team is actually good and it'd be a product you'd miss is, the White Sox can't. I suppose you could say the White Sox could pick their timing by firing a front office and having accountability and ultimately caring about the product they put on the field. But since they don't, they really can't pick the timing.
We're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. But while we don't think the White Sox are going to move to Nashville, are the White Sox going to stay in Bridgeport for the long term? We're going to talk about that next and Rick Hahn's job status after a quick word from our sponsors. The biggest acts are visiting Chicago this summer, on top of all the baseball games and other great concerts, theater shows too. It can be quite the chore and headache trying to secure tickets to all of these shows and events. Buying tickets shouldn't be stressful. Use Game Time to purchase your tickets. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for sports, music, comedy, theater near you. They've got killer deals on last-minute tickets, and their best price guarantee helps eliminate stressing over tickets. If you find tickets in the same section or even row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. That's why Game Time is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country. Download the Game Time app, create your account, and get $20 off your first purchase using our promo code Sox Machine. Terms and conditions apply. Again, create an account and use our promo code Sox Machine for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed.
There's no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform that you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. One of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because Indeed does the hard work for you. They show you the candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your description immediately after you post so you can hire faster. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports, and support the show by saying that you heard it on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire Sports. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Welcome back to the Sox Machine podcast. All right, so we talked about the White Sox flirtation already leaked out that they could threaten to move to Nashville. We're not buying it. Nobody is going to buy it. However, will the White Sox continue to stay at 35th and Shields? That is a more intriguing question because relocating doesn't necessarily mean moving out of the city of Chicago. Also doesn't mean that they could just move out to the suburbs. And I think this part of the Crain's report is what we're going to be talking about, Jim, for the next 3 to 4 years, especially residents of the city of Chicago. And for the report, quote, looking ahead to the next 20 to 30 years, the functionality and viability of the team at its current location has to be considered, a source close to Jerry Reinsdorf said. This is the time to evaluate other options in and around Chicago, end quote. The report adds, a local government official who is familiar with what's occurring said, quote, the situation is the intersection of an owner who doesn't know how long he wants to keep the team and a strategic real estate decision where you either have to move or develop the area around the stadium like the Ricketts did at Wrigley Field, end quote. The report continues, developing the area around Guarantee Rate Field or even building a new stadium and one-hour parking lots could present obstacles according to the ISFA, which is the Illinois authority that helps manage the Chicago White Sox, and I think they also help manage Soldier Field. When the authority floated such an idea several years ago, the local city council member and community groups objected. That is the 11th Ward. That is Bridgeport. Bridgeport and the residents rejected the idea of building around Guarantee Rate Field. However, as a new resident, there's a new council member. That's Alderwoman Nicole Lee. She now represents the 11th Ward. She could not be reached for comment in this report. So while we don't think the White Sox are going to suddenly move to your backyard, Jim, and that would be kind of funny if they did, just between you and I, them staying at 35th and Shields is a more intriguing question because along with our friends from the 108, we've been doing these road trips and going to Minneapolis and Cincinnati. You see on how newer stadiums are doing it with the ballpark neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little bit jealous of what Cincinnati Reds fans have because that complex outside their stadium is wonderful. It's a great place to go before and after the game and continue to hang out. You don't have that at 35th and Shields. Whoever owns the White Sox, when they build a new stadium, will want to have that because that seems to be the new theme, Jim. Atlanta, St. Louis even has a ballpark village. Everybody wants this type of ballpark village. The White Sox don't have it. So whether it's Jerry Reinsdorf owning the White Sox or whoever is owning the White Sox, when it's time to dig dirt and build a new stadium, they're going to want some type of ballpark village. And a ballpark village includes a small to medium-sized hotel for visiting fans, condos to sell real estate, restaurant and bar fronts for people to go before and after games. It's a lot of development. As a Bridgeport resident, I don't know if my neighborhood, my ward, has that type of appetite for that level of development because Halstead up and down still has empty storefronts. And there is a certain sect of the neighborhood I call Old Bridgeport. I nicknamed that. These are the people that have lived in Bridgeport for generations. They live in one part of the neighborhood. And they don't like change. I live west of Halstead on Morgan. And Morgan has seen a ton of change. And it continues to see lots of change. For those that are in Bridgeport, I live near Donovan Park. And I'm sure you would say Donovan Park has changed drastically in the last decade with all the new single-family homes and townhouses that are over there. And we're starting to see more of that in Bridgeport as the demographics change in the neighborhood, where now the largest demographic in Bridgeport is Asians. They are now representing 40% of the ward as the overflow from Chinatown continues to move south into Bridgeport. Some people view it as an issue. I do not. I think Bridgeport's a great community to move into. And there's ample opportunity to continue adding more housing. And you have, 4 or 5 parking lots the White Sox could use to build a new stadium? But what Crain's writes in here, what the ISFA is already talking about, and what the mayor's office at City Hall and the alderman's office in the 11th Ward are going to have headbutts, are the residents in Bridgeport, do they have the appetite for this level of development? If they do not, I could see the White Sox moving from 35th and Shields and relocating to another part of Chicago or moving to the suburbs. That part of the relocation, I think, needs to be discussed seriously unless something drastically changes in the next 2 to 3 years on the thinking of how the residents want this neighborhood to be. And right now there is some conflict of the residents who live here, both old and new, that have moved into the neighborhood, like myself. And it also brings up the question, when the stadium does get built, who's the mayor? Who's the alderman? We've had a lot of turnover in Chicago politics in recent years. This part here, these 4 paragraphs of this report, I think are the most important, Jim, and what we will be discussing in the next 3 to 4 years about the status of the White Sox at 35th and Shields.
Especially with who potentially owns a team then. Like, as you mentioned, the idea that like a Chicago developer is lining up a bid, like could be a case where like there's a Chicago developer or a group ownership group, and including developers, it just says, yeah, we'll pay for a lot of the stadium because like we have other goals with real estate, goals like mixed use, retail, etc., village, condos, restaurants, etc. We just want to land to prop up property value in place. We already own a lot of property, and the team is more or less incidental to that. And like that could be fine, or it could be a case of just like not having a whole lot of wrangling over public funds, and maybe Chicago loses the team in terms of loses it to the suburbs, but like ultimately stays around. Like the fan base remains the fan base. A different part of the fan base's geography is better served, and some like you and the guys from the 108 are worse served. But ultimately, like the Chicago White Sox remain the Chicago White Sox or the Chicagoland White Sox. But I can buy that. When it comes to like where they are currently located, like I went to the game during the Brewers series. You were out of town. You were so nice to give me your tickets for it. I was at the Sabre seminar at IIT, so I was in the neighborhood anyway. But like going to the game, because that was my first game of the year, and like thinking about it in terms of just ease of getting to like the future of the stadium and such. Like aside from the big hassle of actually getting into the park, which is not so much a drawback of the park itself or the architecture, but just the White Sox mismanaging or not caring about the fan experience and really, using outdated technology or emphasizing outdated technology to hold up the pace of fans getting into the park. Like it's fine. Like the location's good, like easy to get in and out of. I met a friend there who took the red line down and could take the green line down, park on either side of the Dan Ryan for free or pay lots. Like there are options for parking, if you wanted enough, and like, nothing wrong with it, especially as like the Bridgeport, as you mentioned, continues to evolve and people want to live closer to the city, and that becomes a little bit more desirable to move to. So yeah, I mean, like it could work, but I think it comes down to just where the interests are of the people who own the White Sox or the person who owns the White Sox. And like, if it's a case of like, yeah, I got a lot of land in Naperville, I can buy more and I just want to turn it into something, like there might not be a whole lot of debate to be had in the city or for the, aldermen or alder people to, have to drum up or fight against. It just might be a case of, the money invested by new owners, like ultimately deciding where they go, because I don't know if the state or the city wants to, have that kind of awful deal around their necks anymore. Like they did when they basically got, run over by Reinsdorf when it came to the leverage he had. So Yeah, I mean, it's going to be fascinating, but ultimately it comes down to like not so much Reinsdorf, although it has something to do with him right now because he's in power, but like it could change dramatically based on like if he looks at the landscape and says like, I don't want to have that fight anymore. I just want to cash out and put my attention in the Bulls. And then it comes down to what the new people want to do with the team.
Yeah, and the new people that would own the White Sox, my recommendation to them would be going door to door and putting the hand out and trying to convince some of the long-standing Bridgeport residents that change can be good and the development would be a positive impact on the neighborhood. Because to your point, like those train lines, right? The Metra, the CTA, plenty of buses. You're right by the highway if you want to drive. That's what everybody looks for in Chicago when picking places to live. That would be desirable. Like if you built a new stadium off of 35th and Shields, let's say back to the original stadium location, and you build a ballpark village that included a little hotel, let's say, but more importantly, condos, I think they would sell immediately because housing is so needed right now in the city of Chicago. You could duplicate, I think, very easily what the Cincinnati Reds have. And while, to your point, it's very easy to get to the stadium and to get home, that's the problem right now for Gary T. Rate Field. It's easy to get there unless you drive. But there's no reason for you to stay. Like you got just Corks.
Cork and Carry, yeah.
Yeah, like that's where people go after the game. You got one bar. That's it. Like you don't have this ballpark village that provides more live entertainment, more drinking options, more food options, like all the new stadiums have. And that's part of where old Bridgeport would just have to get over themselves that, yeah, it's going to be new places. It's not going to be the long-standing places that get all the attention. I mean, I know you and I talked about Schawler's Pump. I walk by that place every single day, Jim. It's still empty. No one's bought the parking lot. The building is for sale now. No one's bought it. So that's where I, as a Bridgeport resident and a White Sox fan, the next 3 to 4 years, what the ISFA has pointed out that we try to float this idea and it got shot down because of the local city council member and the community groups of Bridgeport objected to the idea. This is where we're going to talk about the next 3 to 4 years. The neighborhood is changing, but does the neighborhood have the appetite to be open and willing to this type of stadium construction? If not, then whoever owns the White Sox, Jerry Reinsdorf, a new ownership group, might feel more compelled to work with a community in Chicagoland that would be more open to that possibility. So while in 6 years, I do not think that the Chicago White Sox are to move to Nashville. In 6 years, I'm not sure if the White Sox are at Bridgeport. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about in the next 3 to 4 years. And I think it's time for all residents of Bridgeport, the key word being all residents of Bridgeport, having a conversation amongst ourselves and what we want this neighborhood to be.
You know, to the point about like Halstead and the empty storefronts and such, like there are, you know, concerns, I think, or legitimate concerns to be had about like, you know, if we do build up around the ballpark, does that actually help the neighborhood? Because like, I remember when Yankee Stadium was built and the old Yankee Stadium was basically right off the train line. You walk up River Street and like there are a bunch of bars, restaurants. There's a bowling alley I like to drink in. They had a bag check because Yankee Stadium kind of had like a really, they had a bag policy before most stadiums had bag policies. But if I was just like, down there for the day, like I could leave my bag there for $5 and get a couple of cheap beers at the bowling alley beforehand. But like when they built the new park and they talked about the economic impact it would have. And like, then they built the new park in the opposite direction to where like you didn't pass by any storefronts. You didn't pass by anybody, any independent businesses. You just went right off the train line into the park. And so your money was not spent in the neighborhood. So like, yeah, I think there are concerns to be had when it comes to any kind of, public financing and selling land to a private developer that might be serving a ballpark and people who travel in and out that like, the money might not actually go to the greater neighborhood, even if there is like one big several block area that's suddenly a lot more populated and lively than it used to be.
Yeah, this whole situation regarding as far as the stadium, we knew that it was coming. We knew that the stadium lease was going to expire in 2029. And at some point, they were going to be having this conversation. I thought maybe we wouldn't have this conversation for another year or two, Jim. But now the conversation has started, and it started by the Chicago White Sox, part of their internal review. And I think the biggest internal review for Jerry Reinsdorf is, do I still want to own this team? As soon as he answers that question, then it trickles down to the other parts of the internal review of the White Sox moving forward. So while we talk about the big picture of where the White Sox are actually going to play, let's talk about the near future here. And let's shift the focus back over to Rick Hahn, as, again, he was going to be the number one topic in this episode before this Crain's report dropped about an hour and a half before we started to record. Rick Hahn having 1 year left on his contract, Jim, after this season. Totally explains why he's had the tone that he has, explains why, at least publicly, he's trying to sell the idea that this team could still theoretically contend in the American League Central next year, mostly because the division is still terrible. There was a great article in The Athletic by the remaining AL Central beat reporters. There's only like 3 of them. To talk about the state of the division. The division right now is on pace to be the worst division ever since divisions were created in Major League Baseball, which is saying something. So, yeah, it's been a really bad year in the American League Central, and it's looking like it could be a bad year next year as well. And Rick Hahn's trying to sell the idea, hey, let's not disrupt anything. Let's try to keep pace here, because as bad as this year has been, maybe luck will be on our side next year, and all those things that we continue to hope and wish for will actually happen, and we'll win the division in 2024.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, Jim, when you only have 1 year left on your contract.
Yeah, to me, I wasn't quite sure if you're talking about like whether the tone was like when he got kind of pissy about the Keenan Middleton stuff and like started like, making illusions like, oh, he's being an attack dog because that's what the White Sox need him to be right now, and he's got to prove his worth. Yeah, I mean, like, I can see just how bad this division is and how like the Twins are basically winning it by standing pat. Like, it's a case where, given that the White Sox can't do like a full scale teardown, or at least, since they didn't trade Dylan Cease and they won't trace Luis Robert, nor should they. I think there's a better argument for trading Cease than Robert, but like, they're not going to be doing a full scale teardown probably. So like, there is a theoretical shadow of a possibility that like they could contend in this division and only this division. So it makes sense to like not completely ruled out and not like tell your players that like, hey, we're going to be cashing in for the next couple of years. So just, compile your numbers and see where you end up. Like, I think it does make sense to have a little bit of a unifying theme here, but yeah, like I didn't know exactly, when Nightingale wrote that story and saying like that, Reinsdorf is unhappy and toughest year he's been through, blah, blah, blah. Because who cares ultimately when it comes to Reinsdorf's feelings and believing what he has to say about the standards for his team. But like, seeing like 1 year on Rick Hahn's contract, like, and somebody else tweeted me saying that like somebody mentioned that Kenny Williams, his contract ends when Rick Hahn's does. Like, I can't verify that, so I'm not possible. Let's just say it's the case. Like, if that is the case and Rick Hahn is the only one specified, that does kind of lend some credence to the idea that like maybe the White Sox want to bring in somebody else, just because like when you look at Kenny Williams, like at least he has 2005, and like that's becoming less and less important as time moves on. And you look at those standard definition replays of the 2005 World Series and looks even older than 18 years, but at least it's like a feather in his cap, and his tenure with the White Sox as general manager was a success. Like, Hahn has nothing. So like, if he's being singled out and Williams can stay, that does maybe point to like, I don't want to part with either of my friends, but like if one has to go, like I know which one it's going to be. But yeah, it's hard to know, just because like you never want to bet on the White Sox making transformational change. even like, you know, the Pedro Grifol thing theoretically was a transformational change in terms of like having an interview, like seeking external candidates, but like seeing how it ended up, like, yeah, it doesn't matter anymore whether Grifol gets fired. If like Kenny Williams and Rick Hahn still stay, nothing is really going to change. But to have him singled out, like, you know, I did raise an eye seeing that, because like, why him? And if so, like, is that, you know, Kenny saying like, yeah, Hahn only has 1 year left? Or is Kenny like, because he's talked about like when his contract is up, like he's going to like leave baseball. And like, so maybe Kenny's exit's already planned and Rick's exit is maybe the one that is not necessarily a choice. Like, not quite sure. Like it's an open question, but those are like the possibilities I'm considering.
We have seen in Washington, I believe it was announced today, that they announced a contract extension with their manager, Dave Martinez, and their GM, Mike Rizzo. Both the manager and GM for the Nationals entering this season were in the last years of their contract, which is really rare to see both the GM and manager in their lame duck seasons together. But the way the Nationals have been played since the post-All-Star break has given National ownership, which, by the way, the Nationals are still for sale if you're interested in buying a baseball team, have decided to agree to new contracts with both Martinez and Rizzo. So it is possible that even though Rick Hahn could be entering a lame duck season in the final year of his contract, continuing to be the GM for the Chicago White Sox, I just don't know if it makes any sense no matter what angle you look at it. Like, if you think you contend, all right, well, clearly the last 2 years haven't gone well, so Rick Hahn's not the guy that could build us a team in an offseason, Jim. Make the necessary adjustments to help us reconfigure this roster so we can win the American League Central. Like, I would say the confidence is very low with everyone involved that Rick Hahn is that guy. I could be wrong within the White Sox front office.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't think 2024 is going to go well, then there's no point in having Rick Hahn as your GM entering his lame duck season. You might as well just bring in somebody new and continue with the deconstruction of the roster, reconfigure as far as who you have in the minor leagues to start building the next wave of talent. So either way, logically, in my perspective, it doesn't make much sense to have Rick Hahn after this season, continuing to be the role that he has with the Chicago White Sox. So knowing that he has a year left in his contract, he could join Lurie Garcia and get paid for another year for a job that he won't be doing for the White Sox.
It'd be kind of fitting. Like, you're on the White Sox ghost payroll as well. Yeah, thinking about it a little bit more, like in terms of like the whole Kenny versus Rick, or like, you know, Kenny hanging around and being able to choose his exit, but like ultimately needing to make a change so you don't get this weird lame duck situation where like there is like a no confidence in the current administration, but the White Sox like to be as charitable as possible to people who aren't players or fans. Thinking about the trades as they unfurled, deadline, like that was a case of like, I was worried when Hahn was in the chair, like, you know, if he's had trouble making deals, is he going to be able to like make the deals necessary that the White Sox need to make in this position? And like, he did a good job, I think, getting okay value for Lynn and Giolito and Lopez and Graveman and Kelly. But then like, when you look at like of the pitchers who are not rentals or relievers, because like Graveman had like an extra year on his deal, so not quite a true rental, but also not essential. Like when you look at like the only player moved who was like not or could have been part of future White Sox rosters and for the foreseeable future, that was Jake Berger. And, you know, according to Kim Eng, Kenny Williams was the one that drove that deal. So like, is it a case of like, yeah, Rick, you trade the rentals. When it comes to shaping the bigger picture, I'll take care of that. Like, that's another thing that just kind of flashed across my mind right now in terms of like, you know, who has the confidence to kind of steer this organization towards the next iteration versus like who's currently just kind of in the chair doing the day-to-day stuff. That's like, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in that assessment, but if I'm thinking loud, because we are just kind of idly speculating, like that's something that did cross my mind.
That's a really good point, Jim. So to wrap up, as far as this podcast episode, as we talk about the palace intrigue of the White Sox, stuff that's on the field. Jim, you got a chance to see the Charlotte Knights. They visited the Nashville Sounds this past weekend. What did you see? What did you like? What didn't you like?
Kind of a whole lot of nothing right now when it comes to the roster. Like, it's basically Corey Lee and Adam Hackenberg and Jordan Leisure. And that's more or less it. With Lenine Sosa currently in Chicago, like that's kind of it. Like everybody else is more or less like the Tyler Naquins and Eric Gonzalez's and such. And like it's pretty bleak when it comes to total talent level. And like Adam Hackenberg was like good behind the plate. I was like standing behind the plate, taking photos and just watching him block pitches and hearing a lot of attaboy hacks out of the dugout. Not really giving up a base on a wild pitch or pass ball. A lot of traffic on the base paths, a lot of balls in the dirt. And like he kept everything in the batter's circle dirt. So that was, cool to see up close and get an understanding of that. Corey Lee, like caught I think it was a 3-hitter, like 1-run game. The 1 run was scored in the 9th inning, but like he caught a good game, dealt with very little traffic. So like his blocking wasn't a point of emphasis, but like seemed to catch a good game, or like the Nashville hitters were, not able to handle what like a Charlotte bullpen game could do. So there was that. His timing at the plate though, looks like a mess. Like I think 4 3-pitch strikeouts, not a whole lot of loud contact. So like, I don't think we're seeing him at his best or as fully functional. He came to the White Sox off an oblique injury, but like his timing isn't there yet. So when I hear people saying like, why is Yasmani Grandal still around? Why isn't Corey Lee up? It's like, he doesn't look good in Charlotte right now. So like, I'm inclined to say like, yeah, give Yaz the whole month of August to allow Zavala to come back, to allow Lee to look more like what he's supposed to look like. And then, see which 2 or 3 catchers you want to give the playing time to in September. But based on the way Corey Lee looked at the plate, like he still needs some reps in Charlotte to just, get his timing back, because just a lot of swings and misses in the zone, like not wild hacking, but just, foul balls, fouling up pitches that were drivable, swinging at pitches that were, decent pitches and swinging over them. So I don't think he's there yet, but, want to give him some time and new organization and off an injury to like before making any kind of definitive conclusion. The good news is that from here, Winston-Salem is in Bowling Green, which is an hour north of Nashville. So I'll be driving a couple times over this next week to see what the Winston-Salem Dash have. And that roster should have more going for it.
Yeah, the Charlotte Knights in the first half of the International League were 35-40 with a run differential of minus 103, which is just crazy. But they were 35-40 in the first half. In the second half, the Charlotte Knights are 8-37 with like a run differential of more than 160. They're negative 163, a run differential in 45 games. Holy cow. They're 2-16 at home.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, it reminds me of like my first writing assignment, or like first time doing like anything, resembling beat work, was in Missouri, and I was covering the Mid-Missouri Mavericks, which was a Frontier League team, independent baseball, in their first year of existence. And like Jack Clark was the manager, and like Jack Clark, big name, former Cardinal, like he's got some appeal. That'll get some people interested in this new ballpark that's not affiliated with any major league team to come to see what the Mid-Missouri Mavericks are all about. And I think they started out like 5-30 or something like that, something terrible. And like I got a good education in like asking the same questions or figuring out different ways to ask the same questions and talk to players who are clearly like not, doing well. And like Jack Clark was, like kind of just like cashing a check. Like he parked behind center field. And so like, I couldn't even get a hold of him the first 3 games, cause he disappeared after the game. Then I realized like, oh, he doesn't actually go to the clubhouse. He just walks out straight to center field and goes to his SUV that's parked behind the fence. So like, that's what, when I think of like a single digit win total and then like a loss total in the 30s, I think of the Mid-Missouri Mavericks and just like what that looked like. And yeah, I mean, I suppose like watching Charlotte, like being in the photo well next to the dugout, like, there's still camaraderie and like, there's still like a lot of chatter and such. And like all these guys are trying to be good, be better. Like it's a roster, unfortunately, that does not have talent in terms of like the upcoming prospect talent that's all in Birmingham or it's all in Chicago. Like there's a fallow period there. And then just, they have to fill in the roster with all these guys who are quadruple A at best, but also just, maybe guys who had their major league shot and are now just being in baseball for as long as possible. And this is what you get.
The Charlotte Knights for the year are 43-77. They have a winning percentage at .358. So enter that into your calculation. If you still want to believe the Chicago White Sox in 2024 are going to contend, the AAA team is faring much worse than the Major League team.
Yeah. Corey Lee for Yasmani Grandal is basically like the player analog of the team fortunes. Like, call him up. Do you really want to do that?
Yeah.
And the answer is pretty much no, unless, pure nihilism sets in and like, yeah, sure. Who cares? I don't want to feel things anymore. Then yeah, call up, Corey Lee and the rest of the Knights. But right now it's I think it makes a lot more sense to think about 2025. And that's why I think Rick Hahn having 1 year left in his deal. And as you mentioned, like being a bad time to have a lame duck, calling the shots and really being the architect of that 2025 roster is certainly a fascinating time to bring that up.
Yeah, that's a great way to end this episode, Jim. Great point. And that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast as my voice is giving out. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, Instagram, Threads, at Sox Machine. You can follow me there at SoxMachine_Josh. And we also upload our podcast into our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/SoxMachine. If you enjoy our work and you want more, you can get more by becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/SoxMachine. I know the team sucks, guys, but it does warm my heart with your guys' continued growing support of us on Patreon. Thank you. Thank you for your continued support of us on patreon.com/SoxMachine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content, ad-free versions of both the podcast and website. And when we get new Sox Machine swag, they're the first ones to receive it. Monthly plans start at $2, or you can save with an annual subscription. Again, sign up at patreon.com/SoxMachine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening.